Well, alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. Let's let the people join. So Hussein, there's Jeff, San. See who else is coming. San is still coming in. That's it? Three people? Okay. Well, it's three people then. Um, so this is the beginning of this next mashriq, the next halting place or place of the halting place of the Orient. Third illumination concerning the states that occur in the other world. So we will just slowly read these first two sections because this itself is the beginning of a very serious buildup to some other arguments that he brings forth to us later on in this last section of the Wisdom of the Throne. So it contains the following principles: third illumination concerning the states that occur in the other world. Number one, principle showing that death is right and just. Know that the occurrence of death is a natural thing. Its source, as we have already indicated, is the movement of the soul from the world of physical nature to an enduring modality of being. And the soul's turning away from this body, leaving the dust of this bodily form and coming forth into the abode of the other world. It is not the case, as the physicians and natural scientists have claimed, that the case of the occurrence of death is the finitude of the natural powers, the exhaustion of the body's innate heat, and an excess of superfluous moistness in it, or some other influence of the heavenly bodies, according to their respective shares of influence in the ascendant at one's birth. So here he's dismissing astrology as a gauge of determination. The falsity of these views and others like them has been shown in its proper place. So he's simultaneously dismissing both astrology and natural science and natural medicine as explaining the reason for death. Rather, the cause of death is the soul's self-substantiating power, its increasing intensity of being, and its return capital R through that motion which is of its essence to its maker, for whom it is beginning and in whom is its end, whether it be gladdened and delighted or tormented and dejected. So this is a very interesting principle that he sets up, that death, the reality of death in any case, right? Natural death, that means that we're not talking about things like murder, etc. But natural death, when, as the body ages and progresses, is actually reaching the soul reaching its terminus, its efficient final terminus, its culmination of everything. Principle concerning the gathering. Number two, the gathering of created beings is in a variety of ways according to their activities and intentions. For one group, it is like the reception of an honored company. That day we shall gather the God-fearing to the merciful as an honored company. But for another group, the gathering is by way of punishment. The day when the enemies of God are gathered up for the fire, they will be divided into groups, because of the different kinds of evil habits and traits among them, which necessitate their different animal forms. So some of them will have the lot intended by his saying, may you be exalted. We shall gather him up blind on the day of the rising. For another group, when the fetters and chains are on their necks, they will be dragged into the boiling waters, and they will be thrust into the fire. And others on that day will be dragged into hell on their faces. And for another group, on that day, the sinners will be raised up with eyes terror-stricken. And there are those whose portion in hell is waiting and sobbing. To some, he said, to hell with you, don't speak to me. And as for the others, we have blotted out their eyes. Right on. But this is real fire and brimstone territory here. Okay. Um, in sum, every individual is gathered up according to the form of his inner being and is carried to the goal of his striving and his activity. This is as he, may he be exalted, said, say, everyone acts in his own manner, but your Lord knows better whose way is guided best. And in the prophetic tradition, it is reported that each man is gathered up with whomever he loves, so that even if one of you should love a stone, he will be gathered up with it. For the repetition of actions necessarily brings habits into being, and the habitual states of character of the soul lead to the changing of the forms and shape perceived in the world of the soul. Hence, every state of character that becomes predominant in a man in this world is conceived in the other world in an appropriate form. This is something that has been verified and realized by the people of certainty, meaning the Sufis, so that God, may he be exalted, only create animal bodies in agreement with the motives and ends of their souls. And he created the bodily organs such as the heart, brain, liver, spleen, genitals, and all the other organs and limbs in accordance with the aim of the soul and its essential structure. Likewise, he created for each of the animal species instruments corresponding to the attributes of their souls, such as horns for the bull, claws for the lions, hooves for the horses, wings for birds, fangs for snakes, and the stinger for the scorpion. And whoever considers closely the varieties of men among the people of every trade and occupation, such as the scribe, poet, astrologer, physician, farmer, all the rest, will find that the forms of their bodies correspond to the motives of their souls. At first, these shapes move from men's souls to their bodies, but then they move from their bodies to their souls, that is, as habitual states, so that in the other world they are represented by their corresponding imaginal forms. This is so true. There was a podcast I watched yesterday, and I have actually experienced this, where the subject was a criticism of Scientology. One of the people in this podcast made the mention that hardcore Scientologists are extremely robotic. And that really got me, because every Scientologist I've ever met has been like an organic robot in many ways. I mean, you look into their eyes, and it's as if it's not a human organism, but a machine behind the eyes. It's like every Scientologist I've ever come across has been this way, and they just mentioned this in their podcast yesterday. This is pretty much what Mulla Sadra is also saying. This is what is alluded to in his saying, "May he be exalted." Satan said, "I will surely lead them astray and will fill them with desire. I will command them, and they will surely cut off their animal ears, and they will change God's creation." One of the people of the heart said, meaning the Sufis, "Everyone who looks at his inner being in this world with the light of true inner vision will see it filled up with all sorts of noxious vices, carnal desire, anger, cunning, deceptions, envy, arrogant pride, conceited vanity, hypocrisy, and others. It is only that most people have their inner self veiled from their direct witnessing of these things, but when the veil of concealment is uncovered by death, then they will see them with their own eyes. Then they may be imaged forth in sensible forms and shapes corresponding to their inner realities. So one may see this with his own eyes, that his soul has taken shape in the forms of lions or brute beasts. Or he may be surrounded by scorpions and serpents that are stinging and biting him. Or he may be encompassed all around by a fire that is devouring him. These things are only his habitudes and the traits of character present in his own soul, unless it should be assisted by the divine mercy and rescued from this torment through true faith and virtuous action. We'll leave it here for this week. And now the floor is open to whosoever wishes to offer anything, any gripe, question, whatever you want to talk about. Go for
Um, I'll start.
it. Go for it.
Okay, so first of all, when he says know that the occurrence of death is a natural thing, and and the principle showing that death is right and just. I don't think we're talking only about death in the mortal sense. I
Yeah,
think we're talking also about pardon me if I get the Arabic term wrong, but is it fana?
yeah, I know. Yeah,
Fana?
yeah.
Okay. So that was my reading throughout this chapter is that or this principle is that we're not really talking about end of life as much as
Well, we're talking about it all simultaneously. He's not just talking
yeah.
about the other, he's talking about both.
Okay.
And the way that he's talking about both is also very novel because he's talking about the physical life itself, moving in a transubstantial trajectory of its perfection, which is perfection being death. So this is the physical body, and this is a function of the soul. But simultaneously, the voluntary death of the adept, right, is itself
Mhm.
that very thing as well, right?
Right.
The only
Right.
difference between these two is that one is, it's voluntary, right? So, if you were wayfaring on a spiritual path, um, you have to come to that point to just basically let go completely. That is the final.
Yeah.
That is the
Really voluntary. I'm surprised to hear you say it voluntary because I'm
yeah, voluntary.
not
It's one of
okay. All right.
one of its technical terms in Sufism is mota eradi, the voluntary death.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's how it's actually phrased in a lot of Sufi technical manuals. Yeah.
Okay.
Or volitional death is another way to translate it. From erada. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that sounds good. Right. So both simultaneously. Exactly. Um, all right. That's all I wanted to say for starters, anyway. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else? Just jump in.
So,
That's,
continuing from this point, does it apply that the physical death, uh, it is the process of the soul becoming, let's say, so strong and so independent that it does no longer needs the body and it goes to the next stage.
yes. Yeah.
Okay, and here is the thing which I have always wonder upon it. But I understand in the case of the ones who have taken the spiritual paths or they are progressing in their perfection of their souls that they make this step. But I always wonder how does the same things applies to the other ones that who completely disregard their souls. That in some sense uh, their soul also makes this step in the moment of death.
Yeah. Um, this is what he's saying when meaning that, you are creating the appropriate form of your afterlife, of what you see, right? Or in the noetic, no, general noetic reality of your soul, even right now, without even dropping the body. So, if and these are all just metaphors, and Mulla Sadra perfectly understands that because animals um, being used in a negative sense um, is metaphoric because the animal in itself is intrinsically neither. It's not like that at all. But as a metaphor, so if you are a certain way, like we said last week, if you are, extremely clingy and selfish and egotistical and, end up becoming a, mass murderer or cult, leader, or that sort of thing that, really not only messes with their own soul, but that of everybody else around them and multitudes even beyond that, then you are actively creating that substrate of what you perceive at the moment of death. In the same way that in a psychological sense, the pathology of the dictator, I mean, this has been looked at by multiple people now. The pathology of a dictator is a pathology of paranoia. And it's a paranoia that they can, they harness, manage, and do all that sort of thing. But that kind of absolute power that is craved and even attained with some of these figures arises from a very dualistic and paranoid conception of the world. So you can already see, if you can conceive of that kind of a mentality, you can already kind of gauge now what we mean by these metaphors and these sorts of esoteric texts, or even from these esoteric texts, but in the Quran itself, if we read it esoterically, it is talking about people, experiencing the flames of that fire, because at that point in that noetic world, which is already here, but we're incapable of interacting with it simply because we're encased in this fleshy physical carbon form. But you have basically created the goggles by which you are interacting with that noetic reality based on what you have created up to this point now. Okay, so of course, if you are a homicidal maniac or a dictator, that paranoid paradigm that animates you is going to be the same one that is going to step into that noetic reality of the imaginal world. Nothing changes. It's just that the physical spatiotemporal veil that encased you did not allow you to see that noetic reality now is gone. So you're just there. And this is it's this form of self-entrapment. It's nothing God is doing actively to you or against you. You're doing it yourself.
Okay, so this leads to my next question. Exactly the same paragraph when it is quoted that if everyone has the has the insight to look to his inner reality, he will see how it is filled with different kind of vices and imperfections and so on, but only the veil is the thing which prevents him to see what is in his soul in reality. Here, mm, my question would be, what can help us to indeed to remove the veil and to see to ourselves, because I can that indeed by experience our nature is such that if it is about something good, we are very presupposed to say yes, indeed this good quality is in me. But when it is about something negative, we build
This is
any
this,
kind of barriers to
this is
prevent us to.
this is a complex and complicated discussion, just basically encompasses the entire subject of human psychology. But how is how these technologies of, transcendence, have been crafted by these various traditions, and in our own, particularly since we're talking about Mulla Sadra, that, the Sufis have used or others have used, for a long time. So, the salat, if you're taking the salat merely as a ritual, right, you're not getting it, because the salat has all kinds of dimensions to it that not only explain an esoteric reality, but also are a yoga, in a sense, for lack of a better way of putting it. So that is one form. Then the dua and the dhikr is another one. So the more that you're practicing these things on a daily basis, together with, for example, practices such as muraqabah and muhasabah, in the self, these techniques that the Sufis have of self-assessment. When you put all of this together, then these are the things that help you. These are the techniques, the practice that help you to pull yourself out of that. And usually, but not always, but usually, being associated with a proper guide, a real guide, not all these charlatans that are running around today in our time, but the real guide, someone who has, gone through the path, knows the path, knows, these problems of human psychology, the pitfalls and all of that. And so who can properly, without any ulterior motive, guide somebody from point A to point Z. That is what is required. Now, since in this time there are, a real lack of too many of these real guides amongst us, and every Tom, Dick, and Harry wants to be a cult leader or what have you, then this is the problem. How do we do the saluk without a guide? Everything is possible because, God is always present, right? And the answer to that is Yahdillah linurihi ma yasha. God guides to its light whosoever it wills. But the desire to be guided has to be there. And also, on top of that, the intelligence and discernment needs to develop in that to want to get from point A to B. Impatience gets you nowhere. One of the problems in our modern times, and one of the reasons why you have all these various very destructive and negative cults, mushrooming everywhere, is that people are impatient for spiritual enlightenment, or they're impatient for some kind of community and connection with other people. And so they get very easily suckered into this. This is one of the reasons why all of these texts and all of these traditions consistently insist on patience. Be patient, because patience is not just about a moral virtue. There's also a strategic value to it, so that you don't fall into the kind of pitfalls and traps that are everywhere in our time, So if you have the capability of, as much as your heart desires X, Y, and Z, whether to be connected to a group of people or whatever, but you don't lose anything from patience. And so then understanding this value of patience and practicing it constantly, right? Even with, using patience to work against your own impatience and inquiring into the reasons for your own impatience and all the rest of that, itself becomes a spiritual path without the requirement of a teacher. The teacher then becomes yourself, right? Provided that you have the commitment to really constantly do this self-examination all the time. Okay, and if you take it from that angle and do these practices using the zikr, the dua, and salat, and all of that stuff with a higher understanding of what they are, right? This is what gets you there. And obviously study of books like this, and general texts like this. These things really help. And also learning as much as you can, pitting different ideas against each other from a variety of worldviews, not just one. These things all help. Yeah.
Saidi, what about the let's say, Socratic Platonic, and it is also Islamic formula to see your own image in the eyes of the person which is before you. Uh, does it apply to every person, or again, it is this person which is meant, again, it is the spiritual guide which allows you to see your own image in
Look,
his eyes?
we believe our ontology holds that the whole of the universe is a mirror of God, right? And that, the perfect human being, the Insan Kamat, is the perfect mirror, right? Adam being the Marat al Maraya, which I can't believe it that this Abul Qasim is actually calling himself the Marat al Maraya, but that's a different conversation. These things occur. When they do occur authentically, they provide an incredible amount of information. But there has to be an openness and a kind of a surrender to that process to gain the optimum benefit. Yes. So you can look into the eyes of a person. If, for example, you are projecting X, Y, and Z, or you see certain things that you don't like about yourself in that person, kind of magnified, this is a mirroring process going on. And fundamentally, one of the reasons for this is, as that hadith, very famous hadith says, Al-Mu'mininu mirat al-Mu'minin. And what this actually means is beyond just believers are the mirror to each other, because as we have established from our reading of the Imami text, the believers are the Gnostic adepts, not just your average common, believers out there who just believe things as a bunch of axioms. This is different. We're talking about the adepti. So the adepti, indeed, at that level, will start to mirror things to each other. And so that is why, for example, when we take the relationship of Rumi and Shams, this was not a master and disciple relationship at all. Okay, this was a relationship between two equals. And so Shams was a preceptor for Rumi and vice versa, not his teacher. He was the mirror through which that Rumi got to behold God. And vice versa. Rumi was the mirror through which the Shams of Tabriz was beholding God.
And one more thing, I'm just curious, out of curiosity, how successful is, let's say, contemporary psychotherapy and like methods in allowing you to see your inner reality?
It has its benefits, but it also has its serious limitations. It's not it is not the most effective method. It has its value. I'm not dismissing it altogether, but there are problems with it. Too many to talk about. I mean, Freud gets certain things right, but there's a god awful lot that he gets wrong, just on a very basic phenomenological level. The methods of psychotherapy in recent times have advanced, and there's been a lot of trial and error over the last 50, 60 years. And so both the theories and the practice have developed beyond a lot of the stuff that was written in the last century by Sigmund Freud. There's a lot of experimentation that has come about from this. So the discipline of psychotherapy is slowly but surely advancing. But there are certain blocks in the Western approach to Western psychotherapy that I find extremely idiotic, that the Sufis or other traditions elsewhere had developed far beyond thousands of years ago. And this is the more experiential dimension of these sorts of things. The psychotherapy that we have today is extremely afraid of this dimension. Very afraid of it. And this is fear. It's not genuine criticism, because their criticisms are very lame. It's genuine fear of this sort of experiential dimension. So they term, they've generated sub-disciplines around this where they try to shoehorn all of it into the parapsychological paradigm, right? But then in practice, when you get certain people who are, telling you about certain experiences that they've had, and you try to get deep into their mind about what the problem is, more often than not, these quote unquote paranormal and parapsychological issues invariably in some fashion show themselves. And the current models that we have in psychotherapy are not adequate to addressing some of these things. So unless you are someone that is trained in these sorts of traditions yourself, as a psychotherapist, you cannot really help these people. And the vast majority of people who are coming out with PhDs from Western institutions in psychotherapy are not. They haven't sat in meditation or done a saluk or all the kind of stuff that we know. They haven't done it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Assalam Sheikh. So through the course of our lives, we encounter many challenges and stuff which bring out different parts of ourselves. And I'm hearkening back to the stuff we learned from Ibn Arabi about how the names will reveal themselves throughout our life. I guess my question is how will our relationship with these names change? And I guess something looking forward is how dangerous is this attitude of sanctimony that you see in many of the practitioners of organized religion, and that's sort of preached by the preachers of organized religion?
Well, let's start backwards. The pious sanctimony that you see in exoteric religion is a veil. These people don't have it all figured out. In fact, they have nothing figured out as far as I'm concerned. And they ossify truths that occur in scriptures that then they basically veil themselves with, and it becomes the very opposite. This whole dynamic starts to occur phenomenologically as the very opposite of its intention. So you see this, for example, in a lot of fundamentalists. So they take scripture, they interpret it literally, and they get into this very Manichaean mindset about heaven and hell. And all of a sudden, after a very short period of time, or even forget about the time period, but what you witness about the dynamic of these people who stayed in that state is that they become the embodiment of the very hell that they are trying to avoid. Jung describes this by this process of enantiodromia, which is a great, great, great theory in psychology that he contributed because it's completely esoteric and talks about these sorts of paradoxes and contradictions. Then going back to your first question, what do we do is what I said, to find some kind of a mechanism of a spiritual path that you follow meticulously, and you don't make this dichotomy between your secular life and your spiritual life. This is where all the mistakes begin. Everything has to flow into and become the same. This is why I like using alchemical language, because the alchemical language talks constantly about separating and bringing things together. So on its spiritual path, to avoid this kind of schizophrenia that we find in the vast majority of the human race, or the vast majority of people who claim to believe in something, where they bifurcate their devotional mindset from their work and social one. This is probably one of the biggest problems of all. This is what compounds all of the psychic problems. Psychic as in the psychological problems of most people. These two have to be the same, such that when you're going to work, when you're with your coworkers, when you're going out to eat, when you're on the can, with your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, your devotional and spiritual identity has to flow into those. If it doesn't, then you're in trouble. unfortunately, the contemporary culture, beyond just the religion, but the contemporary culture of postmodernism or Western postmodernism encourages this sort of psychic schizophrenia as a matter of course. You're not allowed to be the same in your inner and your outer. You have to be a shapeshifter. You know, one way in one setting, another way in another setting, and expect it to be that way. And if you're any other way, you get shunned and canceled and all the rest of that garbage.
Okay, I see. There's something that I want to clarify to make sure I'm correct on something. So a lot of people will view their life as moderating their outer habits, so their habits in the phenomenal world. One thing I'm thinking from what you've said is we also have to adopt the same attitude towards moderating our actions in our inner world as well, correct?
Well, the actions by definition arise from the inner world. So once you are moderating the inner world properly, not by shunning it, but by transforming it and transmuting it, then obviously the actions that follow from that transformation of the inner will then be that sort of way in the outer as well.
Okay, I see. Thank you very much.
I'm having some trouble with like developing, good substantive thoughts about these sections. So but there's something that I've if I could just go back to another thing that I've been kind of thinking about, like big picture stuff with Sadra. I'm thinking about this idea, this like hermetic phrase, as above, so below, and which I think is kind of like a bastardization of the actual thing, like through theosophy, but I mean it's very popular and people use it all the time, and
But they don't understand what it means. That's the thing.
yeah. But there's this phrase, and then there's just the idea of macrocosm microcosm correspondence, which you find in so many different traditions, and that people also seem to be really tuned into. But when I think about cosmology from Sadra's perspective, and we've talked about how he seems to be, we could call him a kind of idealist, because of his idea that to be is to be perceived, that the things that we perceive are us, we are the things that we perceive, at least when we go above the material form level. So when I think about this, and I think about these hermetic kind of ideas, it seems that it's a particular interpretation of that, or I'm wondering about this, that as above so below in this kind of idealist account is something like it's because all of it is inside of the soul, that what is above the planets, it's usually a reference to astrology, like the planets are inside of us. It's not to say that there's planets out there and then there's planets in here, but it's that the planets out there are already internal. I don't know if that's right.
No, that makes sense. There's a point that Mulla Sadra brings up in his refutation of reincarnation that I think bears thinking about. He says, he basically says, in one part of his argument, that there's really, once a body drops, there's really no psychic and psychological connection between it and that further. So, even in the time of Mulla Sadra, and this is because the Nohtawis were very active in that period of the Safavid dynasty in Iran, and they believed in reincarnation. One of the reasons for Mulla Sadra's refutation was because of this. He makes this comment in one point in his refutation that I find very interesting, because people were reporting, well, we've had past life memories and that sort of thing. Obviously, it existed in Iran of the Safavid period. It's not a New Age phenomenon. And Mulla Sadra responds by saying that he says that within the matrix of the universal soul, everything past, present, and future is already imprinted. So human beings, whether voluntarily or not, even though they are self-contained souls, are connected through the universal nature ultimately to the universal soul. And if every form is imprinted in it, then all these impressions that you are getting about your past lives are not actually your past life, but they're impressions that are in that universal matrix of the universal soul itself. So dealing with your question, the planets, etc., this is the same thing that is going on, right? So long as we understand that this soul that we're talking about is not some kind of a solipsistic entity in the way that Descartes would take his own epistemology about these sorts of things, right? That there is a greater, divine economy, here all around us, or garden, or ecology, for a better word, that we are also hooked up to in our internality, that is a world unto itself, the monad. So, I look at Mulla Sadra's way of dealing with this as a more nuanced and sophisticated version of the same one that Leibniz does in his monadology. So take it from that perspective. If you take it from that perspective, then this kind of idealism itself starts to become a little bit nuanced. But I do agree with you. Some areas of Mulla Sadra's idealism do also bother me from time to time. And so I have my own basic interpretation and spin on a lot of this stuff that I get from a variety of places, to temper it, whether it's be the Shaikhi, the Bayani, or other philosophical approaches and that sort of thing. Because I think idealism, in the way that many Platonists sometimes take it, creates this extremely sharp dualism, epistemic dualism, that I think is a problem. It doesn't explain anything,
Yeah, I feel like I have to resist my own tendencies when I read Sadra to not collapse his idea of soul into a very simplistic kind of idealism, because the way he argues for it too is very straight and to the point and syllogistic. Yeah. He's just like, a perceptible has to perceive itself, and that's kind of the end of the argument for him. It's like we've demonstrated this, and it's just it comes across as really flat. I've been going back and reading some of the 20th century phenomenologists, Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, and I find that's a good way of tempering it, because. And I also think it leads to problems. I have more questions about that, but Heidegger, but both of them, Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, are very good at depicting the thickness of things. The soul for them, Dasein, is it's a very three-dimensional kind of thick field, and they've spent a lot of time really concentrating on the thickness of it. And in Heidegger, in later Heidegger, he starts talking about the earth and the world. That the earth is this kind of self-concealing density to things that the world is opening onto. But in Sadra, you get the sense that whatever would correspond to the earth is that's the elemental stuff that has nothing to do with the actuality of the soul, and there's really there's not a sense of concealment. I don't think it's all just about transparency and light. And I just wonder about that seems to, it makes sense, from the illuminationist standpoint, but it also seems to just flatten, or there's a danger of things just getting flattened.
Which, yeah, it's a little bit more complicated in the Asphar. It's not as flatland as one gets it in the text like this. It's more multifaceted. He does kind of flesh this out a little bit better in those texts of his magnum opus, but that there is still a linger element of that, this flatlandizing tendency in Mulla Sadra. He gets that from the Platonism. But ironically, I find Sohrawardi here very relevant because he doesn't do that. Sohrawardi's kind of theurgical metaphysics of the angels, right, creates this extremely alive and multidimensional kind of thing that we behold, where everything is every material element has its own titulary angel, that the whole Zoroastrian thing. Such the material world itself that we're beholding in front of us at the moment is being kind of directed or emanated by its own emanatory scheme from the light of light. So that occurs within that hierarchy of the light of light. That occurs in Mulla Sadra, but when he gets to this epistemic issue, he falls into some of his, in my opinion, peripatetic tendencies of flatting out things. Right? And this is what I have a problem with Mulla Sadra as well, and have had for a long time. This is also where I think Sheikhi school and their extremely exuberant kind of alchemical approach to these sorts of questions, I think kind of addresses them, at least from an optics and aesthetic level, much better than Mulla Sadra does. Much, much better. Yeah. And these things are important, in my opinion. It's not just a window dressing. The reality of the soul and its kind of experience of the world is not just this very one-dimensional or two-dimensional theorem, and that we just you put A, B, C, and that's it. There's nothing else to think about beyond that. It's not like that at all. There's a lot of things to think about.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments about Sohrawardi and Ahsai. Sohrawardi is really concerned with the phenomena. Maybe that's why he has this asalat al-mahiyya.
Right here.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that it seems like it's a problem of language, that for Sadra, we know that he has the reality. I mean, he's talking about the reality, but then, I don't know, maybe he's like a defeatist about being able to describe it. Like
no, it's not a defeatist. I think it is the scholastic background, the very specific. I mean, just remember, his teacher was Mir Damad. I mean, Mir Damad, as brilliant as Mir Damad was, when you read this guy, it's just like this guy is, I mean, I don't even know what to say. The density of his terminology and the argumentation that he puts just reveals a certain mind trained in a very specific way, and also one that is extremely set in its ways about thinking about things. Mulla Sadra was his student, his best student, as a matter of fact. Even though they disagreed, and Mulla Sadra went his own way philosophically, whatnot, but in Mir Damad, you get to see, what Mulla Sadra actually is a product of. And Mir Damad was a brilliant man, but still, there's that kind of very straight-jacketed kind of intellectual training.
What about Ibn al-Arabi or any of his students? I mean, have they dealt explicitly with this kind of thing, like the idealism or the
well, I mean,
dimensionality
Ibn Arabi tries to deal with this himself in the Futuhat al-Makkiyah several times, and elsewhere in some of his shorter treatises. In that regard, Ibn Arabi is a lot like Sohrawardi. He's interested in experience and the theorizing second. And the theorizing comes as a consequence of the experience rather than the other way around, right? So he will bend the theory to the experience rather than bend the experience to the theory. And I think that's the right way of doing things, because theories and philosophizing, is when you're doing it just based on trying to fit a certain thing into that theory, is trying to take a a fragment of experience and try to fit it into another momentary fragment of experience that is theorizing about its experience. And it doesn't work. So this is what someone like Ibn Arabi perfectly understands. So some of his criticisms that you find on the philosophers are often spot on. They're just not just mere rantings, of Sufis against, the rationalists. He is actually, breaking them down in argument, in several very important instances. And his points are bullseye correct in what he's saying, right? So this is what we have to be mindful, that even when we're philosophizing about experience, right, that, like you said, we don't take all of this as it doesn't become that secondary intelligence that blinds us to the thing in itself. The thing in itself is the primary thing, always. The theorizing about what that thing in itself is should be way down the line, the secondary ladder of things. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems that these other figures have they pay way more attention to the nuances of language. We know that Ibn Arabi does that, but based on Idris Samawi Hamid's presentation of Ahsa'i, he's all about that. He's all about the grammatical intricacies and taking all the peripatetic terms and converting them into a different register.
But Ahsa'i was also a Hawsawi, whereas Ibn Arabi was not. And also Ibn Arabi was a Sunni. And this is why I often think that this ranting of Ahsa'i against Ibn Arabi itself is more of a cultural, not Shia sectarian one, but more of a cultural kind of thing between a man trained in the seminary and a man who resisted something like that and developed his intellectual arsenal pretty much on the cuff throughout his entire career. I appreciate, as much as I absolutely adore Sheikh Ahmad Ahsa'i more than anything, but I appreciate Ibn Arabi a lot more than him, because there's a level of honesty and immediacy to what Ibn Arabi is saying compared to what Ahsa'i is saying. Not that Ahsa'i is wrong in anything he's saying from his own context, but one thing that makes Ahsa'i extremely sterile sometimes in his own thing is precisely that grammatical stickling. Even when he's taking terminology from other schools, like other peripatetics, and trying to rebrand them and all that kind of stuff, he's not pushing the boundaries to the breaking point that Ibn Arabi did, or like the Bab did, because I think these things are important, because every theory in a sense is a boundary, and a boundary about a particular moment of an experience, right? So but as we know, not every moment is the same. Every moment it is upon some new task. Every day it is upon some new task. So to take an idea or a theory about God or about reality and try to apply it in every moment of time to that reality is a problem, it's a veil. And these seminary trained people, whether Mir Damat, Avicenna, Mulla Sadra himself, he admits this, by the way, in his Asfar. He's very honest about this. These things become veils. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't study this stuff. You need to learn how to be phenomenologically and philosophically rigorous in these sorts of ideas. But to take these theories and the methods themselves as the be-all and end-all of things, as many peripatetics did, and even to some degree, some of the later Illuminationists did, not so widely, is to fall into a trap, a very serious one too.
I remember reading somewhere that it might have been Fazlur Rahman's book about how what Sadra believes about philosophy itself, or maybe it was Morris, I don't know, but the idea that because he's committed to this idea of substantial motion and asalat al-wujud, that when he talks about philosophy, he also thinks that it's not something that can ever be completed, that he might invite this kind of ongoing change of the way that we speak about things.
Yes, which is basically axiomatic about the transubstantial mode. So there's no end to anything. It's an endless continuum, all occurring within being. So that even our discussion and categories and language about talking about any of this stuff must by definition change from age to age to age.
Yeah, that's what the process philosophers said explicitly. They said that our categories have to change, not just the details, but the fundamentals.
Yeah. They need to change. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Okay. Well, for next week, we'll just read the next two propositions and just keep going until we finish this book in the next few weeks. All right. Had a relatively okay participation today. Hope more people join us in the following weeks. Everybody be well. We'll get together at the same time next week. So yallah.